Hey everyone. Jane Lazorchak. I lead the Climate Action Office, which is in the Agency of Natural Resources. We're really grateful that you're taking your time this afternoon to join us to learn about a project that's being led out of our office to develop a tool that looks at how we track and measure progress to benefit both you all as Vermonters and us as decision makers in thinking about where climate actions are hitting the ground and having measurable impacts. So want to welcome other staff from the Climate Action Office today who are going to be supporting the presentation, as well as our contractors, Eastern Research Group, to introduce themselves before we walk you through the agenda and a few overview slides about the project. So I'm going to turn it over to Sophie Veltrop with the Climate Action Office.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. My name is Sophie Veltrop. I serve as the Communications and Community Engagement Coordinator for the Climate Action Office. I'll pass it over to Erica.
Thanks, Sophie. I'm Erica. I'm the Climate Change Data and Progress Analyst, and I'll pass it over to Melanie with ERG.
Thanks. My name is Melanie Sands. I'm the project manager for this project for the ERG team, and I'm a social scientist at ERG. Anna Claire?
Hi everyone, I'm Anna Claire Marley. I'm a senior resilience and data specialist at ERG, and I've been helping with a lot of the data and metrics portion of this project. And Kessel?
Hi everyone, my name is Kessel John, and I am your Zoom host for today. So if you have any technical questions for Zoom issues, you can message me, and I'll also be putting my email in the chat if email works better. Melanie, should I go over Zoom housekeeping now? Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Audio for this meeting is available through your computer speakers or through the phone. If you'd like to switch to phone audio, you can do that by clicking on the microphone icon, or actually the little caret next to the microphone icon, selecting switch to phone audio and following the instructions provided. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. And if you would like to give verbal comments during the Q&A session, please raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon in your Zoom control panel indicated by the little hand. And then you should be able to unmute and begin speaking. You can also use the chat box for any Zoom technical issues. Again, chat or email, either will work. And yeah, I think that's about it for Zoom. So back to you, Melanie.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Jane. Can you go? Yeah, I was going to say, we need to go to the agenda. Thanks, Kessel.
Yeah. Thanks, Kessel, and thanks everybody for being here again. Again, Jane Lazorchak with the Climate Action Office. Really appreciate you taking the time for us to walk you through this project, because we're at a critical phase of thinking about both what we've learned through this initial phase and where we're going. And today's presentation will really welcome you into the project, learn a bit about the background and purpose, and then we're going to hear from Eastern Research Group about the tool development and the recommendations that they're providing us, the Agency of Natural Resources, to think about what we do next. Sophie's going to really walk us through some Q&A as well as some poll questions to help support how you all can further engage with us in the next phase of this project. And then Erica, who's really the project manager for this as we move into phase 2, will walk you through next steps and closing. So again, thanks for you all being with us today. And before we really dive into the tool, I'm going to introduce you to the sort of background and rationale for why we took this project on. So first and foremost, Vermont is a leader in climate action. Vermont has been thinking about both within our own agency, but across state government, how we think about cutting our climate pollution, how we think about adapting to climate change and impacts, and how we support both our natural environment as well as our communities in building resilience. And in doing all of this, we really try to ground that in centering the voices of Vermonters in what those solutions and programmatic work looks like across state government. That work is happening across many agencies, not just the Agency of Natural Resources. Our office, the Climate Action Office, is supporting that work both within our own agency and through our own initiatives. but is also guided by an interagency advisory board to think about how we can amplify and coordinate that better to serve all of you as Vermonters in that work. That interagency advisory board looks at how we track spending, programmatic work, and really delivers a cohesive message and voice to fill the gaps and serve Vermonters like you. So that work is happening, and we really understand and appreciate that Vermonters see that in pieces, but we want to think about and be guided about how we demonstrate that in real time and understand how those policy levers and programs are actually having a meaningful impact on the ground. So that work, and much of this work is articulated through a framework that what is the Global Warming Solutions Act. That law, which was passed in 2020, sets ambitious requirements for the state to meet cutting our climate pollution. It also sets out objectives for how we build resilience, how we increase carbon sequestration through natural and working lands, how we build resilience and expand adaptation in a changing climate, and how we incorporate equity and engagement. Much of the work that I just spoke to that our office thinks about how we do and how we coordinate across state government. This law also put forward sort of a framework for how we track and communicate progress around this and required the Agency of Natural Resources to build a tool that does just that. It thinks about not only what are the widgets and tools we're doing to cut climate pollution, not just how many heat pumps and home weatherizations we're doing or EVs we're deploying. It also put forward requirements to think about how we track over time enhancements around resilience, how we're adapting to climate change, and again, how we're thinking about engagement with Vermonters. And this first phase of the project really set forth the question about how do we do this? What are the metrics? What is the data that exists in the state to do this? And what are some of the IT and communications tools that the state could consider for putting that all together in a tool that both is responsive and also is easy to access for both decision makers and the public. So we are at the completion of phase 1 of that project. In working with Eastern Research's group, and we wanted to come back out to Vermonters and talk about what we learned and understand from you where there might be gaps or ways to further engage with us as we think about what's next. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna Claire to walk you through the process for developing the tool and appreciate you being with us today. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Jane. So I'm going to walk through our process for developing this tool. So first, just to give you an overview of what we did, we first wanted to review existing tools and data resources to see what kinds of tracking tools there already are in Vermont and in other states to get an idea for what we're trying to aim for with this project. We then wanted to identify Vermont's climate priorities. So what does the state actually, what are our goals for the climate change progress across the state? And then once we've decided on those, we went into step 3 of identifying the data and information that was available for each of these climate priorities. So to start thinking about how can we measure progress towards these goals in the forms of metrics and what data and resources are available in order to be able to track those metrics. We then wanted to take all this information from reviewing tools, from identifying climate priorities, identifying data resources and metrics, and develop recommendations for finally developing this tool. And then throughout this process, we also included public engagement to gather input on the tool priorities and how these priorities should be measured. So we engaged the broader public, we engaged external agency partners, as well as community-based organizations. And so now I'm just going to walk through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. So our first step was to review existing tools. And we wanted to first see what tools already existed in Vermont to measure progress and what do those tools look like. So you can see I'm showing the Clean Water Interactive Dashboard for Vermont, and the user can click on different land use sectors like agriculture, natural resources, different program groups, and then identify different performance measures or metrics that they want to see. And so you can click through that and see a graph on the side of what that looks like. So for example, here we're seeing the acres of agricultural conservation practices implemented. We also wanted to look at different tools from other states. So for example, we looked at Lake Tahoe's climate resilience dashboard, and here they have a little bit of a different format. So you can see the different goals listed really clearly at the top, like track changing climate conditions or support a resilient environment. And then the user can kind of drill down into these and see different, more information about each goal. So for example, for supporting a resilient environment, you can learn more about forest resilience and wildfire risk, aquatic invasive species. And so kind of through this process of looking at these different tools, we can start to come out with different themes of what we found was helpful across the tools, and then what we might want to consider for inclusion into this one. So for example, we found that a mixture of narrative and graphical information was helpful. So you could read things on the screen to learn more, but then also see a map or graphs that help also explain the metrics. Also being able to directly navigate to topics of interest to learn more and drill down into specific things people were interested in. Having clear metrics was also important, so not using a ton of jargon and something that people can understand. And again, the ability to drill down to find out more about a certain subject was also helpful across the tools. So just by reviewing what tools are out there, we can start to piece together what might be helpful for developing this tool. Our next step was to kind of synthesize and identify what Vermont's climate priorities are. And these we broke out into different groups or sectors. So for example, we looked into what are the Vermont's climate goals for transportation, for natural lands and open space, for response and recovery, for working lands, and we can kind of get more granular about what we want to do in each of these different categories in Vermont. So to show you some examples for the built environment, we wanted to ensure that all people have access to safe, accessible, and affordable housing. For natural lands, to conserve or enhance natural lands and open spaces and associated ecosystem services. For response and recovery, to ensure Vermont's infrastructure returns to normal operations quickly after damage from a natural disaster or other climate event. And then for transportation, to just generally increase transportation choices and access. So in this way, these different priorities are kind of a mixture of addressing reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but then also making people in the state more resilient to future climate changes. Then once we have these climate priorities, we need to determine how we're going to measure progress towards these. So for each of these different priorities, we came up with metrics or ways to measure progress for each of them. So for example, for the transportation priority, one of the metrics we looked at was the number of mobile homes replaced or retrofitted to reduce risks from climate hazards. For natural lands and open space, we wanted to measure the acres of wetlands conserved and restored through easements. For response and recovery, the average length of road and bridge closures. And then for transportation, public transportation ridership over time. So in this way, we're starting to get more granular about what exactly are steps that can be taken or things to measure towards these climate goals. And we can start to see on a whole how Vermont is doing at addressing each of these different climate priorities. And through this process of identifying metrics, we also engaged a lot of different agencies that are related to those different sectors I showed you about. So for example, of course, we wanted to talk to the Agency of Transportation, Vermont Emergency Management, the Public Utility Commission, to start making sure that the metrics that we are using for each of these priorities reflect what the agencies themselves are wanting and what they can measure. And through this process, we were also able to get information on what data they are currently tracking and could give us, so we can start to piece together not only what we should be measuring, but what does Vermont already have information for. So for example, some data we found really easily through existing state and federal data sets. For example, the state is already tracking the % of registered electric vehicles in the state, the acres of floodplain restored. So there's a lot of really great data already being generated by these agencies that we're just trying to harness and kind of put in one spot so that people can see all of this information and all of the great climate progress that is happening across Vermont in one space. We also identified through this process some metrics that we weren't able to find data for, but this is also helpful because it can show us what things that Vermont might want to track in the future. So, for example, we didn't have as much data on climate engagement, natural lands, and the response and recovery sectors. So we're not currently collecting data on something like the number of climate engagement events in the state, but through this process, we were able to identify that that might be something we want to start counting and making sure we're tracking progress towards to keep informing our climate priorities and progress towards those goals. And then, as I said, with the overview slide, public engagement is really something we wanted to incorporate throughout this project and keep on getting feedback from. So our main goals for public engagement was to provide information about the project and process, to provide information about the tool content, gather input on the climate priorities and tool content, and then to understand who might use the tool and for what purposes. So we really wanted to be thinking about who's going to be using this tool and making sure that whatever we're developing is going to be helpful for those people, and to get feedback and your thoughts on what you want to see measured and what things could look like. And so through this process, we had a bunch of virtual meetings with different community-based organizations, such as Vermont Garden Network, the Community Resilience Organizations, Capstone Community Action. And then we had we were able to have in-person engagement events with Addison County Relocalization Network and the Racial Justice Alliance. So thanks again to all the community-based organizations that we engaged and for providing feedback on this project. And kind of through all of this process and engaging the public, we were able to develop tool recommendations, which I'm going to pass over to Melanie to start digging into further. So thanks.
Thanks, Anna Claire. So yeah, basically in thinking all of this through, what did we learn through the review of existing tools, trying to piece together how we're going to measure these climate priorities, the data that's available. Some of what rose to the top we'll talk through in these tool recommendations and then in the next few slides here. So at a high level, when we think about what is the vision for the tool, a couple of things stood out. We wanted the tool user to be able to access information in a couple of different ways. One, for those of you who are seeing a screen right now, at a high level, we want people to be able to have a sense of the overall story of Vermont's climate priorities and climate action progress. So what's the high level snapshot? What's the story? How are we doing in achieving our climate action goals? Big picture, high level. And then we also heard from people in engagement and understand that some users are going to want more detailed information about particular topics, issues, sectors. So we also want to make sure that the tool can also provide a way for people to access that type of information. So high level, big picture, and then also be able to dig in and have more detailed or nuanced information for particular topics or sector areas of interest. We also came to understand that the platform should really serve a couple of different purposes or contain several different things that you can see here. It should show information in multiple ways. Anna Claire touched on that. We heard and we also understand that some information could be really helpful to present in a map format, some in a chart. Some people would prefer to have some text to provide context for a topic or just more information about a topic. So presenting information in various ways, that would be something that the tool really should embody to be to really accommodate user preferences and needs and present the information clearly. Also have a user-friendly interface. So we want to make sure that the tool is easy to use, as intuitive as possible, and that the user isn't distracted on trying to figure out how to use the tool and can actually just access the information that they want in a helpful way. The tool should also really convey information using plain, easy to understand language. So trying to remove jargon and unnecessary language, communicate clearly and simply in a way that people can just take the information and absorb what they need from the tool. Have the tool be interactive instead of just stagnant information, be able to click into different information of interest, whether that's drilling down or navigating across topics, for example. And then also, as we were throughout the tool process, understanding the type of information and the amount of information that might need to go into the tool, understanding on the back end that we need to be able to accommodate large data sets. And then lastly, on this screen, noting that in addition to having the ability to accommodate those large data sets, we want the ability to update those data sets over time and add new tool elements or features as the tool continues to evolve over time. We also came to understand that it'd be really helpful for this tool that will be developed to be integrated with other Vermont climate action tools and resources. One of the things we heard in engagement is that people really appreciate a lot of the tools and resources that Vermont is developing, and it would be really helpful if there's a centralized way of accessing them. So to the extent that we can integrate some of these tools and resources and make them accessible easily through the tool, that could be really helpful for users. For those of you seeing a screen, some of those tools and resources that might be helpful to integrate could be, for example, the Municipal Vulnerability Indicators tool, which has a lot of mapping features, updates to the 2021 Climate Action Plan that are underway, the Resilience Implementation Strategy, the Environmental Justice Mapping tool that is forthcoming, the Climate Action Toolkit. It's not pictured here, but something, an additional resource that might be helpful to integrate. So integrating current and forthcoming relevant resources could be a helpful next step as well. Okay, so in considering that, one of the things we wanted to do next is just show a general mock-up of sorts of what the tool content and how that information could be presented and the type of information that could be presented. So we're going to do that. I just want to clarify before we do that is that the actual tool development will occur either later this year or next year. And at that time, the tool design, content, all of those things will undergo further development and input and finalization. So this is really just to provide a sense of what are we talking about here? How are we applying what we've learned throughout the project to suggest some elements of tool design or content. So just giving you a sense of things. So here you can see, for those of you viewing a screen, an example of some of the content that might appear on a landing page for the tool. And so I'm going to describe it a little bit for those who may not be able to see a screen at this time. But basically, it's a tool label with a little bit of information about what the tool is. And then there are several high-level categories of information. The high-level information that the tool is intended to really synthesize that we're really interested in. So if we recall back to Jane's recapping of the key things that the Global Warming Solutions Act is wanting us to improve and track and make progress on, these connect with these main buckets or topic areas of climate mitigation, climate equity, climate engagement, and climate adaptation and resilience. So on the homepage, we might see these high-level topic areas and then basically a snapshot of what progress or what's happening under each of them. So for instance, under climate mitigation, it might show high-level trends and progress on emissions, energy use, and efficiency improvements. or under climate equity, it might have a high level snapshot about progress on advancing climate action or overburdened and low income communities across all the different sectors. So this would be a way to take those high level topic areas and provide, again, a high level snapshot of what's occurring. One of the other features on the home page is that there would be a way to access along the right-hand side for people viewing the presentation are these representations of buttons that would allow you to click into specific sectors or topic areas of interest. So great, you have a high-level snapshot, but maybe I just want to understand what's happening with the built environment. So that would allow me to just go directly to that topic and learn more about what is happening in the built environment, for example. So high-level information, also ways to access sector-specific information or topic-specific information directly from the home page. And then also somewhere on the home page, we have it represented in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. It could be some links to other relevant resources and tools. So if I see something that maybe links to something in the forthcoming environmental justice mapping tool, I might just want to click directly from this tool to that tool and not have to go and type in a separate address. So again, trying to find ways of connecting this tool with existing resources so people can toggle in between them more easily. So with all of that said, we're at the home page, and so maybe you take a look at, you're seeing some high-level information or trends about the climate adaptation and resilience topic area. One thing that could be possible is that you would then click on that topic area. It would take you to a little bit more about that topic area. So it's kind of, okay, very high level, click on a topic area, takes you to a little bit more detailed information on that topic area. So here we have an example of if you had clicked on climate adaptation and resilience, then you would see a little bit more information, a little bit more detail around what's happening across sectors in that area. I will say, I'm going to touch on some things on this slide, but just to preface, these aren't real numbers from real data in Vermont. These, again, are just examples to give you a flavor of the type of information you might see. And so it's pulling and summarizing some of that metric information that Anna Claire was talking about. So for example, you might see the percentage of transportation resilience improvement projects that are completed. And that also could link to, if you're interested, tell me more about that. It might click to some Vermont Transportation Agency information on that. So again, it's creating these layers of detailed information. Like maybe this layer is enough for me. Great, I see a percentage of transportation resilience improvement. I see a percentage of culverts in critical condition. How is that changing? But it will also hopefully include links or access to yet another layer of information if I would want to dig further. So just again, providing some different information across sectors that roll up to this climate adaptation and resilience topic area. So moving from there to kind of go down another layer. So say you're looking at the bottom left-hand corner of this screen, there's the number of mobile homes that were weatherized in 2024. And so I'm curious about, okay, what else is going on in buildings and thermal energy? And either from this slide or from that home slide that allows you to access specific sectors, I could then access a sector-specific slide. And so again, it's kind of drilling down yet another layer. So here we see an example of a sector slide for buildings and thermal energy. And a couple of things to point out on this type of slide. As Anna Claire was mentioning, for each sector, there are a range of different priorities that the state is trying to achieve. And then there are ways of trying to measure how we're getting toward those priorities. So for those of you able to see the screen, for buildings and thermal energy, in a yellow bar at the top of the screen, it's it's indicating the priority that we're going to learn about in this view. And so it would note the actual priority, which in this case is investing in energy efficiency upgrades to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings and thermal energy sector and ensure these upgrades are financially accessible. So that's one of the priorities we're interested in understanding progress toward. And then the information below that priority are the different ways we're measuring that through metrics and visually or I almost said verbally in a written way, depicting that. So in some of the measures here, examples of how we might be measuring progress toward that priority, household energy use. What is that looking like over time? Weatherization, how many housing units were weatherized in 2024? How many low-income housing units were weatherized in 2024? How many mobile homes were weatherized in 2024? So we can show different dimensions within weatherization as well. Another example type of data on the right of the screen, how many heat pumps were installed over time. So different ways of showing what's being measured that speaks to that priority. And for a given sector, since there are multiple priorities, it might appear something like, for those of you who are familiar with different websites, or what that visually might look like is you see a priority, you see this type of information, you scroll down a little bit, you see another priority, you see the information that is being tracked in support of that priority. So there would be priority information that shows progress toward that priority, another priority, because there are multiple priorities within a given sector. And so just one more quick sector overview of a sector page, just to give another sense or another perspective or example of what that could look like. Here we're looking at the built environment. And again, it's the same kind of design where there would be a specific priority that the state is trying to measure or see progress on. Here for this example, for the built environment, it's enhancing the resilience of Vermont's built environment, communities, infrastructure, buildings, and cultural assets to high priority hazards, including fluvial erosion, inundation, flooding, heat, wildfire, and landslides. So some of the information that might be tracked to help inform that, you could see here, oops, sorry, my screen minimized. But you could see some of the different measures of how we're trying to see that climate action progress. So for instance, there might be measures around flood risk, the number of properties that are removed from flood hazard zones. Is that going up? Is that going down over time? For wildfire risk, the percentage of buildings in direct wildfire exposure risk in a given year. What's that percentage looking like over time? Is it going up? Is it going down? Similarly, with heat risks, for example, one measure is the number of municipalities with heat reduction strategies in their emergency management plans. So all of that, again, it would be showing a priority. What is the information that supports or can help visualize or convey progress toward that priority? Could be another priority within that sector. Again, information that helps convey progress toward that priority. And so just before I pass slides over, again, the actual tool is going to be developed toward the end of the year or next year. And so this is really just a sense of the type of information or the type of layering of information that allows people to see big picture and nuanced type of information that is possible or that we heard could be helpful throughout this part of the project. But the actual design and content is yet to be determined and confirmed. So just wanted to make sure I reiterate that. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sophie and to walk us through some polls and questions and answers.
Sure thing. Thank you, Melanie, for giving us that overview of what a tool could look like. And I see we've already got a question coming in the chat. We'll get right over to Q&A. We have about 15 minutes. And before we jump into Q&A, we just have a couple polls that we'd love to ask you. So as we turn from this first phase of exploring what kind of information will be in the tool, we're turning towards refining that and looking at what the tool could look like in the future. And we'll give you a sense of the next steps at the end of the presentation, but we want to ask you a couple questions with an eye towards that next step that could help us inform us in this process. So Kessel will launch some polls and you'll be able to answer them on your Zoom screen. So you can see the first question. We'd love to hear how you prefer to learn about climate action progress. Do you like looking at charts and graphs? Do you like spatial information through maps? Do you prefer to read something in a narrative? Do you like to listen to something? Would you rather watch a video? This will help us to think about the types of ways we can convey information. And if there's something that's not on here that comes to mind, you can drop that in the chat too, and we'll capture that. Great, so we've got about 13 answers come in. I'll give it 5 more seconds in case there's somebody still noodling. Wow, we've got a lot of charts and graphs, cool. Okay. And I think, is that showing everybody the results now? Okay, great. Oh, I see. Multiple. Some folks wanted to put in multiple. Great. Yeah, you can add that in the chat if you had like thoughts on multiple but couldn't put that in. Yeah, tracking that. Oh, great. Missing is an interactive webinar. Excellent. Yep, something a little more like events live based is maybe what that could look like. Okay, so let's move on to the second question. Okay, so you should be seeing on your screen currently when you're looking for climate information, what are your go-to sources for accessing Vermont-specific climate information? Are you looking at the news? Are you looking at the Climate Action Office's website or information sharing? Are you looking at other state agency information? Are you going to organizations such as nonprofits or community-based organizations? Dashboards? Are you tuning into meetings? Using the National Weather Service? Word of mouth? And again, if there's something else that's not on this list, please do drop it in the chat so we can track your other ideas as well. Great, I'm seeing about 10 folks have responded. I'll give it about 10 more seconds so folks can get their final answers in. Okay, and I'm going to close the poll out and share the results with you all. So that should be showing you what came through. I'm seeing some preferences here for news outlets and organization websites, newsletters, or emails. That's great, super helpful. Thank you. And we've got one last question. So as we think towards our next steps, we might have the ability to host some testing groups. And if you are somebody who would be interested in participating in a test group, let us know. And then we can circle back if that's something we're able to do. Great, I've got 9 answers in, so I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. And we can move on to, whoops, questions and feedback. So we can do this verbally. I'll hand it over to Melanie to moderate. I know we already saw some questions coming through in the chat, but if you'd like to speak up, you can also use audio. feel free to raise your hand using the react button at the bottom of your screen.
Great. Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I thought maybe we could just go ahead and start with the questions that are in the chat to make sure we cover those before going to the broader crowd. So looking at the questions in here, Sophia asks, how much of the things you're planning to measure are already being measured, and is this tool an aggregator? And how much of this data will require new information gathering? And then how are we planning on making that happen and paying for it? So we think to kick us off on that question, Anna Clara, I might turn it over to you, and then Kat, if that's helpful to jump in. I know that you both did a lot with the data. So maybe if you could generally speak to the first part about how much is being measured, how much it might be measured. And then I think once we get that piece taken care of, we can kick it over to maybe Jane or the state team for in terms of making it happen and paying for it. So let's start with the data portion, and maybe Anna Claire, you could kick off the response there.
So the portion about how much of the things you're planning to measure are already being measured.
Yeah, and how much will require new data gathering? Yeah, just to the extent that you can speak to it without having maybe the concrete percentages of that in front of you.
Yeah, I'm realizing that would have been a good slide to include. We have a table of the different sectors and the percentage of things. I remember that for the natural lands sector in particular, I think we had 100% of the metrics we had data for, and there was a few other sectors that we had all of the data for, but then there were some sectors like public engagement that we really didn't have much data for at all. So I think it just depended on the sector and like which agencies were already tracking a lot of this kinds of data and had data resources that were readily available, and which ones were things that we needed to identify as future things. And I can see if I can bring up that table, and I can put that information into the chat as well.
I have it up right now too, so I can just share that.
Thanks.
We found data for about 2/3 of the metrics that we identified, and as Anna Claire mentioned, certain sectors were a lot higher than others. I think our highest was electricity with 63%, actually, and public health was actually had 100%. But after public health, we had 63% with electricity, and then the lowest was workforce and economic development, which was just at 8% and would require a lot of additional coordination.
Thanks, Anna Claire and Kat. Yeah, and I think that one thing, and I think Jane flagged this in a response in the chat, but just because there is a data gap right now doesn't mean that we won't keep it on the radar for possible inclusion down the road, or you know, that information gets conveyed to everyone at the state in the event that they want to start tracking that information. But on the latter part of that question, and I know that you replied a little bit in the chat, but Jane, in terms of the new data collection and how will it be the tool or the new data collection be happening or paid for? Is that something that you can speak to?
So I guess first and foremost, I want to just stress that I do really think of this tool as we build it to start as an aggregator. There are not additional resources really right now that I can point to exactly that would be in the space of data creation. However, I will say that we have a data governance team for this project that represents many of the agencies as well as external entities such as the Energy Action Network and Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, who have a lot of data and also are data collectors, and organizations that consider dashboards and communications of data as well in this space. So that data governance team has a lot of overlap also with our interagency advisory board to the climate office, and does a lot of coordination and thinking about how we can use this kind of a tool as a communications tool to leverage and communicate much of the work across state government. So we see it as an added value. And so I think over time, as we build this and see there are like a particular gap in data around engagement or workforce, those are areas we can work together to identify the possibility of additional resources or the ability to track new data over time. And so I think that the systems are in place to really see this tool as a value add and therefore be a catalyst for new resources to help derive data. But for right now, as we think about phase 2, we have funding to consider how we build and put forward a tool. We don't have funding to think about how we create and implement new data sources for it.
Thanks, Jane. Matthew, I see your hand up. Not sure if I lost you or if you went on mute.
I think Matthew might have accidentally left when he
Left
tried
when
to
he was
unmute
trying to unmute
himself. So
himself?
I'll
Okay.
keep an eye out and see if he'll rejoin.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, because I was scrolling through the list.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Kessel. Also, just I saw where Richard put a question in the chat, and thanks, Lindy and Jane, for replying to that. But for those of you who might not be able to see the screen right now, if you're just on audio, Richard asked, on the back end, when you submit a query, does the system return a static slide that was, for example, maybe made by the staff, or does it return a dynamic slide where the data are filled in from a data set? And so, for instance, if data were updated, would the slide information change? Can you make a query that no one has ever made before? And as Lindy responded, that the system's not returning a static slide. That's just how we were trying to show some examples of what that information could look like today, and that the data will be updated on an agreed upon timeline with that data governance team that Jane mentioned, and agencies providing the data. And then to the question, the part of the question about can you make a query that no one has asked before? And that is going to be dependent on the design of the tool and the output of that information that has yet to be determined. So just wanted to share that out in case folks weren't able to see Richard's question or that response. Are there other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. You can put it also in the chat if that's helpful. Okay. All right. Well, I think given that I'm hearing silence and it doesn't appear that Matthew was able to rejoin, so we could hear his question. Maybe if he does, we can loop him in at the end. I may go ahead and turn it over to you, Erica, to just recap next steps.
Thanks, Melanie. For those of you that joined us a little later, I'm Erica. I'm the Climate Change Data and Progress Analyst with the Climate Action Office. So part of my role at the Climate Action Office will be leading the implementation of this tool going forward. Right now, we're finalizing what we call phase 1 of the project, and this presentation is essentially showcasing all of the work that was done during phase 1. And we'll be officially done with this phase in a few weeks after reviewing feedback from the public and colleagues in the Climate Action Office. So looking ahead, we talked about this a little bit before with someone's question, but looking ahead, one of our next steps is addressing any data gaps. As mentioned, this is something that's an ongoing effort since new and improved data is always continuing to emerge over time, but it's a critical step in getting us ready for phase 2. So phase 2 is actually where we'll be building the tool itself. And during phase 2, we're going to continue to engage the public and other key audiences for feedback, so the tool is as effective as possible. And as Sophie brought up before in the online poll, we plan to have a diverse group of folks to help us test the tool when the time comes. So that's a quick overview of what's coming next. I'm really excited to be part of this team, and I'm looking forward to helping bring this tool to life. So thank you so much for your time today and for all the feedback and support that's helping make this project a reality.
Thanks, Erica and ERG team for being here today. Before we sort of wrap up and close out the hour, does anybody else have any final comments or questions they'd like to ask before we let you all enjoy the rest of the beautiful day? Not seeing any. This presentation is being recorded and we'll look forward to making it accessible on our website. So stay tuned and look for updates on our website, which is, we can put it in the chat, maybe Sophie, if that would be quick for folks. And look forward to staying engaged with you all in the future. So thanks so much for being here today and have a wonderful afternoon.